The official record begins at 4:17 Zulu time. On a Tuesday frozen so deep the jet fuel ran thick as honey. At Echelon Air Base, perched on the northernmost lip of Alaska, the world was a monochrome sketch of white snow and black sky. This was the top of the world, the front line of a war so cold it was measured in radar sweeps and engine readiness. Inside the dim humming confines of the Combat Information Center, two young airmen were staring at a ghost. It had materialized without a signature, a phantom blip painting the screens at the edge of their detection range. It wasn't just a blip, it was an impossibility. The contact was moving at Mach 3, then abruptly decelerating to a near hover, executing a 90-degree turn that would have turned any known aircraft and its pilot into a cloud of metallic confetti. There was no heat bloom, no sonic boom picked up by the arrays, no transponder squawk. It was simply there, a silent, screaming violation of physics, dancing on the edge of contested airspace for precisely 3 minutes before vanishing as if it had never existed. The report filed by the watch commander was clinical, dry, and tinged with disbelief. It was logged as an uncorrelated high-velocity target, code UHV-1. It was the first of its kind. The men and women of the 33rd Fighter Squadron, the Arctic Vultures, treated the news with the casual disdain reserved for headquarters, gossip, and faulty weather balloons. They were fighter pilots, apex predators of the sky, and their world was one of tangible threats, rival bombers, aggressive reconnaissance flights, the ever-present mechanical gremlins that could ground their multi-million-dollar F-22 Raptors. Ghosts on a screen didn't bleed. They didn't pose a real threat. In the squadron's ready room, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of stale coffee and bravado. Here, hierarchy was measured in flight hours and the audacity of one's call sign. Major Cade Viper Jensen, all sharp angles and coiled confidence, held court. His wingman, Reaper, and Blitz laughed at his jokes. Their own call signs a testament to the lethal simplicity they worshipped. They were a brotherhood forged in the crucible of afterburner thrust and G-force, and they looked sideways at anyone who didn't fit their mold. The mystery of UHV-1 was a momentary distraction, a puzzle for the intelligence nerds in the windowless rooms below. Up here, in the thin, frigid air, the only things that mattered were skill, instinct, and the cold, hard steel of their machines. They had no idea that the ghost on the radar was about to become the ultimate test of all three, and that the key to solving it sat quietly in the corner, nursing a cup of tea. A pilot they barely knew and had already dismissed. Her name was Captain Ilara Vance, and her call sign was Stardust. It was painted in small, unassuming script below the cockpit of Eagle-7, a stark contrast to the aggressive, predatory names that adorned the other Raptors on the flight line. Stardust. To men like Viper, it was a joke. It sounded soft, whimsical, like something a child would wish upon. It lacked the requisite lethality, the sharp-edged promise of violence that a fighter pilot's moniker was supposed to convey. They saw it as a reflection of the pilot herself, an outsider who had transferred in from a different world. Vance hadn't come up through the traditional fighter jock pipeline. Her record was impeccable, but unusual. She had spent years flying the RC-135 Rivet Joint, a lumbering reconnaissance plane, affectionately known as the Flying Pig. She was a master of sensors and signals intelligence, a pilot who had fought wars from 30,000 feet by listening, not shooting. She understood the electromagnetic spectrum the way Viper understood a dogfight. To the Vultures, this made her a technician, not a warrior. Her transition to the F-22, the pinnacle of air superiority, was seen as a product of some new Air Force initiative, a box-ticking exercise in diversity rather than a recognition of merit. They saw her quiet demeanor as weakness, her methodical precision as a lack of killer instinct. The laughter was never to her face, of course. It was in the locker room, over beers at the officers' club, in the subtle smirks exchanged when she walked into a briefing. Stardust. They'd draw the name, infusing it with a gentle mockery. Thinks she navigates by the Big Dipper, Viper had once quipped, to a round of appreciative chuckles. Vance heard the whispers. She saw the looks. She was fluent in the language of exclusion, but she never reacted. She simply performed her duties with a quiet, unnerving competence. Her flight checks were flawless. Her knowledge of the Raptor's complex systems was encyclopedic. In the simulator, her mission scores were consistently among the highest. Her kill ratios achieved with an economy of movement that was brutally efficient. She didn't fly the Raptor like a brawler. She wielded it like a scalpel. This only served to further alienate her. Her excellence was cold, analytical, lacking the flamboyant artistry the other pilots prized. She was an equation they couldn't solve, and so they dismissed her. While they laughed, the ghost returned. IV-2 appeared 3 days later, this time, tracing the coastline with impossible speed, lingering for a full 6 minutes before again blinking out of existence. The tension in the CIC ratcheted up. This was no anomaly. It was a probe. It was testing them. And the vultures, for all their bravado, had no answer. The first intercept was a mess. The order came down from NORAD command with a thunderclap of urgency. RV-3 had appeared, this time deeper inside their air defense identification zone. Viper and Reaper were scrambled, their raptors clawing into the polar sky with plumes of incandescent fury. The mission was straightforward: intercept, identify, and escort the contact out of the zone. Use of force was not authorized, but the implication hung in the air: be ready. The radio chatter, piped into the speakers in the ready room, was a symphony of confidence. Viper 1, contact bearing 030, 100 miles, Angels 40. The GCI controller's voice droned .com and professional. Copy that, Striker. Viper's voice crackled back, smooth as polished steel. Viper 1 is painting the target. Got a lock. A murmur of approval went through the pilots gathered around the speaker. This was their world. The ghost was about to meet the vultures, but then, the confident tone began to fray. Striker, Viper 1, the target is... It's not holding a steady course, it's maneuvering hard. The blip on the main screen in the ready room was a graphic representation of the chaos. The UHV, represented by a red triangle, was moving in a pattern that defied logic. It made instantaneous vertical jumps of thousands of feet, then reversed course at speeds that should have ripped its own fuselage apart. Viper's green icon and Reapers beside it strained to keep up their own flight paths, looking like clumsy, lagging scrawls against the UHV's razor-sharp geometry. Damn it, I lost lock. Reaper's voice, usually a low baritone, was a tight, frustrated yelp. He's gone. Vanished off my scope. He's not gone, Reaper 1, the GCI controller cut in, his own professional calm cracking. He's now directly behind you 5 miles, a collective intake of breath in the ready room behind him. How? There was a burst of static, the sound of labored breathing under Viper 1 engaging defensive maneuvers. The green icons on the screen performed a desperate, wrenching turn. The red triangle shadowed them for a moment, a predator toying with its prey. Before accelerating to a speed the system couldn't even clock, it shot north, out of the zone, and vanished. Viper and Reaper returned to base in a sheath of frustrated silence. The debrief was tense. Viper, his face pale beneath his customary swagger, could offer no explanation. There was no visual contact, no heat signature, no engine noise, nothing. It was like dogfighting a phantom. The mockery in the ready room died, replaced by a sullen, uneasy, quiet. Ghost was real, and it had just humiliated their best pilot. In the corner, Captain Vance watched a tactical replay on a side monitor, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking at the icons, she was looking at the negative space between them, at the patterns in the chaos. The failure of the first intercept sent a shockwave through the command structure. The Ghost, now designated Spectre by the intelligence analysts, was no longer a curiosity. It was a strategic threat of unknown origin and capability. The base was put on high alert. Engineers worked around the clock, recalibrating sensor arrays, running diagnostics on the Raptor's advanced and APG-77 radars, searching for a flaw in their multi-billion-dollar shield. They found nothing. The technology was sound. The failure was tactical. In the days that followed, the culture of the 33rd Squadron began to curdle. The easy confidence was replaced by a brittle tension. Every conversation seemed to circle back to Spectre. Theories were thrown around, each more outlandish than the last. A hypersonic drone from a rival superpower, a stealth aircraft that bent light, even whispers of something not of this world. The uncertainty was a corrosive acid, eating away at their elite self-image. Viper bore the brunt of it. His swagger was gone, replaced by a grim, defensive anger. He spent hours in the simulator, running intercept profiles against increasingly aggressive AI, pushing the virtual Raptor to its breaking point, trying to replicate the impossible maneuvers he had witnessed. He couldn't. The machine simply wasn't designed to move that way. The mockery that had once been directed at Vance now turned inward, becoming a quiet, gnawing self-doubt among the pilots. Their entire doctrine was based on the F-22's technological supremacy. They were trained to be the hunters, not the hunted. Spectre had flipped the script, and they didn't know their lines. Commander Thorne, the squadron's CO, a man whose face seemed carved from Arctic granite, observed the shift with a hawk's eye. He was old school, a veteran of Desert Storm who had flown the F-15 when stealth was just a theoretical concept. He understood that the greatest threat to his squadron wasn't the ghost in the sky, but the fear it was breeding on the ground. He needed a new approach. He called a full squadron briefing in the main auditorium. The tactical replay of Viper's failed intercept was projected onto a massive screen. Every failed lock-on and desperate maneuver laid bare for all to see. The room was deathly silent. The definition of insanity, Thorn began, his voice a low rumble, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We have tried to fight this thing. We have tried to match its speed and agility. We have failed. He paused, letting the weight of the word hang in the air. So, we're going to stop trying to fight it. We're going to try to understand it. He clicked a button, and a new mission profile appeared on the screen. It wasn't an intercept. It was a dedicated reconnaissance flight. Operation Stargazer, the title read. A single aircraft, outfitted with an additional signals intelligence pod, would fly a passive route along the edge of the zone. The goal was not to engage, but to listen, to gather every scrap of data possible, emissions, energy fluctuations, atmospheric disturbances. The pilot for this mission, Thorn continued, his eyes sweeping the room, needs to be an expert in sensor systems and signals analysis. They need discipline, they need patience. He paused again, and every eye in the room followed his gaze as it settled on the pilot in the third row. Captain Vance, you're up. A stunned silence fell over the auditorium. Operation Stargazer was the most critical mission since the crisis began, and Thorn had just handed it to the outsider, to Stardust. A low murmur rippled through the ranks. Viper's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. It was a slap in the face, a public declaration that his aggressive tactics were wrong and her passive, analytical approach was now the way forward. He saw it as a rebuke, a betrayal of the fighter-pilot ethos. Vance, for her part, showed no reaction, no flicker of triumph, no hint of surprise. She simply met the commander's gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. Understood, sir. Thorn then dropped the other shoe. Her WSO will be Lieutenant Bell. Marcus Glyph Bell was a rookie, fresh out of training, a quiet, studious officer who spent more time reading technical manuals than bragging at the bar. He was paired with Vance for a reason. He was a blank slate, uninfected by the squadron's ingrained culture of contempt for her. He would follow her lead without question. The pairing was a clear message from Thorn. This was a new game, with new rules and new players. The briefing ended, and the pilots filed out, breaking into hushed, indignant clusters. Vance and Bell remained behind, moving to the tactical planning table. As they bent over the charts, the contrast was stark. Vance was calm, her movements economical and precise as she highlighted potential flight paths and sensor sweep angles. Glyph, nervous but eager, scribbled notes, his respect for her deep knowledge overriding any preconceived notions. He had seen her simulator scores. He knew the whispers were just noise. They're expecting Spectre to appear in the northern sector, based on its previous patterns, Vance said, her voice low and even. She tapped a point on the map far to the east. But the telemetry from Viper's flight showed a minute energy spike here, just before Spectre vanished. It was dismissed as sensor noise. Glyph looked at the coordinates. It was an empty patch of sky over the frozen sea. You think it's a staging point? I think it's where it decloaks, Vance corrected gently. It's not flying from A to B, it's arriving where not going where they expect it. We're going to be waiting where it's born. It was a bold, intuitive leap, based on a single, almost imperceptible data point that everyone else had missed. It was the kind of thinking that had made her a legend in the reconnaissance world. Glyph looked from the map to the quiet, focused captain beside him and felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't expected. Absolute confidence. They weren't going ghost hunting, they were going to lay a trap. The pre-flight preparations for Eagle-7 were conducted under a shroud of tension. The ground crew, loyal to the squadron's established hierarchy, worked with a detached, almost sullen efficiency. They saw the mission as a fool's errand, a passive exercise in waiting to be spooked. As Vance and Glyph walked out to the flight line, the Arctic air was sharp enough to cut glass. The F-22 sat under the harsh floodlights, a dormant beast of geometric angles and radar-absorbent skin. Its call sign, Eagle-7, was standard. But below the cockpit, the name Stardust seemed to glow faintly in the frigid air. Inside the tandem cockpit, the world shrank to the green glow of the instrument panels. It was a sterile, intimate space, a self-contained universe of data and light. Glyph in the rear seat ran through his systems check. His voice a steady, professional litany over the intercom. WSO systems online. SIGINT pod is green. All sensors calibrated. Copy, Glyph. Goff Vance replied from the front, her own hands moving with practiced grace over the controls. Tower Eagle-7 is ready for taxi. The clearance came, and the Raptor began to move, a graceful predator gliding through the frozen darkness. They bypassed the main runway, taxiing to the secondary strip that pointed them east, away from the expected contact zone. It was a small deviation, but a significant one. They were already off-script. The takeoff was a controlled explosion. Vance held the Raptor on the runway until the last possible second, then rotated with a fluid, powerful motion, launching them into the black sky like a spear. The G-force was a physical presence, a heavy hand pressing them back into their seats. Below, the base shrank to a cluster of scattered diamonds on a field of black velvet. They climbed to 40,000 feet and leveled off, the twin engines settling into a deep, resonant hum. Eagle-7 is on station, Vance reported to the CIC. Going dark, she switched off their transponder and radar, putting the aircraft into a state of full passive reception. They were now deaf, dumb, and blind to conventional systems, a ghost themselves. Their only eyes and ears were the specialized sensors in the pod beneath them, and Vance's own uncanny intuition. They flew in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the whisper of recycled air, and the quiet thrum of the electronics. Below them, the sea ice was a fractured, abstract painting. Above, the stars were a brilliant, cold fire, scattered across the infinite blackness. There was no moon. It was in this profound silence, this absolute isolation, that Glyph began to understand. This was her world. This wasn't about G-forces and missile locks. It was about patience. It was about listening to the silence until it spoke. Anything, Glyph. Vance's voice was calm, a quiet intrusion into the cockpit's meditative state. Negative, Captain, he replied. The spectrum is clean. Nothing but starlight. He used the word without thinking, then caught himself. He glanced at the back of her helmet, wondering if she'd noticed. She did. That's what we're here for, Lieutenant, she said, a hint of something warm in her voice. Just listen to the starlight. For 2 hours, they listened. The cockpit became a sensory deprivation chamber, suspended between the star-dusted canopy above and the dark, frozen world below. In the Combat Information Center, the mood was sour. The main tactical display showed Eagle-7 as a single, friendly icon tracing its lonely, predetermined path. On the other side of the screen, the northern sector, where Spectre was expected, remained stubbornly empty. Viper and his wingman, suited up and on standby in the alert hangars, were growing restless. This was a waste of fuel, a waste of a valuable flight frame. They were hunters, sitting idle while a technician went for a scenic flight. Any contact, striker. Viper's voice crackled over the command channel, sharp with impatience. Negative, Viper 1. Airspace is clear. The controller replied, his tone flat. Inside Eagle-7, Glyph was starting to feel the strain. His eyes burned from staring at the waterfall displays, searching for a single, anomalous spike in the endless cascade of benign data. The silence was no longer meditative. It was oppressive. Doubt began to creep in. What if she was wrong? What if this was just a wild goose chase based on a meaningless flicker of data? He was about to voice his concern when Vance spoke, her voice cutting through the hum of the cabin. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Where, Captain? I've got nothing, Glyph said, his eyes scanning his screens with renewed urgency. Not on your screen, Lieutenant. Look outside. Glyph craned his neck, looking up through the canopy. At first he saw nothing but the familiar tapestry of stars. But then, following her implied direction, he saw it, a patch of sky no bigger than his fist, where the stars were gone. It wasn't a cloud, it was a hole, a perfect, circular void in the starfield, as if a celestial hole punch had blotted out a piece of the cosmos. It was a patch of absolute blackness, deeper and more profound than the surrounding space. My God, he breathed. What is that? Gravitational lensing, Vance stated, her voice devoid of alarm, replaced by a focused, intellectual curiosity. Something is bending the light from the stars behind it. It's massive, and it's right where I thought it would be. As he stared, a flicker of light appeared at the edge of the void, a single pinprick spark, then another and another. A cascade of faint ethereal lights began to shimmer around the perimeter of the black circle. It looked like a corona, a halo of pale, shimmering energy. Glyph, are you getting any of this? Vance asked, her hands already moving, adjusting the gain on their sensor suite. Negative. No emissions, no radiation, nothing, he replied, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. It's not supposed to be there, but it is. The shimmering lights coalesced, and the void began to shrink. The stars behind it reappeared, distorted and warped for a moment before snapping back into place. In the spot where the void had been, something new now existed. It was small, indistinct, but it was solid, it was real. And then, it began to move. On the screens in the CIC, a new icon suddenly bloomed into existence, a red triangle, UHV-4. It had appeared from nowhere, exactly where Captain Vance had predicted. The room erupted. Contact. We have contact. In the cockpit of Eagle-7, Vance watched the newly materialized Spectre. She didn't move to engage, she didn't even flinch. She just watched, her mind racing, processing. They hadn't just found the ghost, they had witnessed its birth. The appearance of Spectre sent a jolt of adrenaline through the CIC. The controller, his voice now sharp and commanding, immediately redirected the alert fighters. Viper 1, Reaper 1, scramble, scramble. Vectors, Angels 45, you have a hostile contact, 150 miles east of your position. Copy, Striker, vultures are away. Viper's voice was a feral growl of vindication. Finally, some action. On the main screen, the two green icons representing his flight lifted off and began a searing climb, streaking across the map toward the red triangle, but Vance had other plans. Striker Eagle-7 is holding position, she announced calmly, her voice cutting through the excited chatter. We are not engaging, we are observing. A confused silence followed. Commander Thorne, monitoring from his station, keyed his mic. Explain yourself, Stardust. The use of her call sign was deliberate. This was her show. Sir, Spectre isn't aware of our presence. We are in a perfect observation position. If Viper's flight engages, it will react and will lose the opportunity to gather baseline data on its capabilities in an unalerted state. It was sound tactical logic, but it went against every fighter pilot instinct. You see the enemy, you engage the enemy. Thorne hesitated for only a second. Hold your course, Stardust. Viper 1, you are to proceed to the target area but hold 5 miles out. Do not, I repeat, do not engage until I give the word. Your job is to box it in. Eagle-7 is the eye in the sky. A burst of static was the only reply from Viper, a clear sign of his fury, but he was a soldier. He would obey. Copy, he clipped out. Holding an Eagle-7, Vance and Glyph had a front row seat. Spectre began to move, not with the frantic, impossible jerks of its previous appearances, but with a slow, deliberate grace. It traced a lazy arc across the sky, as if surveying its domain. It was sleek, a seamless, wingless teardrop of a craft that seemed to absorb the light around it, making it appear more like a hole in the sky than a solid object. Glyph, what do you see? Vance asked. Still nothing on the active sensors, Captain. But the passive radiometrics are going crazy. It's drinking the ambient radiation, starlight, cosmic, background radiation, even the faint radio waves from Earth. It's powering itself. This was a breakthrough. Spectre didn't have a conventional engine. Its entire fuselage was a power source. It explained the lack of a heat signature. It didn't burn fuel. It consumed the universe. As they watched, Spectre's leisurely flight path began to change. It turned, slowly, deliberately, until it was pointing directly at them. Captain, Glyph's voice was tight. Does it see us? No, Vance said, though a sliver of doubt touched her. It can't see us. We're electronically silent. But the craft continued its approach. It wasn't accelerating. It was just coming, a silent black dart closing the distance with unnerving certainty. 5 miles, 4, 3. It's looking right at us, Glyph whispered, his hand hovering over the defensive systems panel. Viper 1, I have a visual, Vance radioed, her voice still impossibly calm. Spectre is on a direct intercept course with my aircraft. Stardust, do you have a death wish? Viper snarled over the comms. Get out of there. Negative, Vance replied. Hold your position, Viper. I want to see what it does. The black shape grew in their canopy, a sliver of absolute night against the starfield. It was a high-stakes game of chicken, played in the silent, unforgiving vacuum of the Arctic stratosphere. The distance closed with terrifying speed. 2 miles. 1. The ready room, watching the icons converge on the main screen, was holding its collective breath. This was suicide. Spectre was an unknown entity with demonstrated capabilities that defied physics, and Vance was letting it approach her unarmed, unshielded aircraft. Stardust, report. Commander Thorne's voice was a whip crack over the command channel. It's still closing, Commander, Vance replied, her tone as level as a still lake. No hostile indications, no weapon systems activation detected. It's just looking. Through her canopy, the Spectre craft was now close enough to see in detail. It had no visible cockpit, no seams, no rivets. Its surface was a matte black that seemed to drink the light, making it difficult for her eyes to focus. It was less a machine and more a piece of geometry, a perfect, lethal shape given form. Glyph in the back seat was rigid with tension. His training screamed at him to deploy countermeasures, to break away, to do something. But his orders were to follow the captain's lead, and the captain was doing nothing but watching. The craft didn't slow it past them. With less than 1,000 feet of separation, the black teardrop slid by their right wing, a silent, elegant wraith. It was so close they could have thrown a rock at it. As it passed, every system in Eagle-7's cockpit flickered. The lights dimmed, the screens momentarily went blank, and a low warbling hum vibrated through the fuselage. It was over in a second. Status Glyph, Vance demanded. Systems are back online, he reported, his voice shaky. We had a massive electromagnetic fluctuation. It scanned us. It took a complete snapshot of our systems. Spectre continued on its path for another few miles, then executed one of its impossible, instantaneous turns. It faced them again, hovering, and then, for the first time, it communicated, not with radio waves, but with light. A series of brilliant blue pulses emanated from its surface, flashing in a complex, non-random sequence. It's talking, Glyph breathed, his fingers flying across his console. It's a data stream, highly compressed. I'm recording on the command channel. Viper's voice was incredulous. What the hell is going on? Stryker, did Stardust just make friends with it? Before anyone could answer, Spectre accelerated. It didn't build speed, it was simply gone. From a dead stop to Mach 5 in an instant, it streaked past Viper's position, the shockwave rattling the Raptors even miles away. It shot north and, just as before, vanished. The mission was over. Eagle-7 turned for home, the precious data from the encounter stored safely in its systems. The flight back was silent. Glyph was too stunned to speak, his mind replaying the moment the alien craft had slid past them, the feeling of its silent, electronic gaze sweeping over their jet. Vance was quiet for a different reason. Her mind was already at work, dissecting the encounter, analyzing the light pulses, cross-referencing the energy spike with the craft's behavior. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was no drone. The scan, the communication, it was too deliberate, too intelligent. They hadn't been observing a machine. They had been evaluated by a mind. The debriefing room was a pressure cooker. NORAD generals were patched in on the main screen, their faces grim and demanding. Commander Thorne stood at the head of the table, while Vance and Glyph, still in their flight suits, stood before them. The air was thick with questions. Glyph presented his findings first, his voice gaining confidence as he detailed the electromagnetic scan and the recorded data stream. The light pulses weren't just communication, sirs, he explained, putting the decoded information on the screen. It was a compressed package of information. It contained complex mathematical theorems, star charts from a position outside our solar system, and this he displayed a 3D rotating image, a schematic of breathtaking complexity. It was a perfect, detailed blueprint of the F-22 Raptor's engine and avionics systems. The room fell silent. It scanned us, one of the generals said, his voice raspy. It read us like an open book in less than a second. Yes, sir, Vance confirmed. It learned everything it needed to know about our capabilities from that single pass. Viper, standing at the back of the room, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. While he had been preparing to fight it, Spectre had been studying them, downloading their secrets. His aggressive posture would have been a fatal mistake. It would have been like a swordsman charging a tank. The focus then shifted to Vance. Captain, the lead general asked, his eyes boring into her. You put your aircraft and your WSO at extreme risk. Why did you allow it to get so close? Because it wasn't an attack, sir, Vance said calmly. It was a greeting. All its previous maneuvers, the high-speed passes, the probes, that was it knocking on the door. It was trying to get our attention without appearing overtly hostile. When I held my position, I was signaling that we were ready to listen. You're saying it's peaceful? Another general scoffed. It's a military reconnaissance vehicle of unknown origin, Captain. I'm saying it's intelligent, sir, Vance countered. And it's cautious, it's assessing us. It showed us it could understand our technology to signal that it was our superior. It was a display of dominance, but not necessarily of hostile intent. It was a warning and an invitation, all at once. The room was divided. To the old guard, this was heresy. You met a potential threat with overwhelming force. But to others, Vance's logic was undeniable. Spectre had held all the cards and had chosen not to play them. The discussion raged for an hour. Finally, the lead general made a decision. Captain Vance, you are now lead tactical advisor for this operation. All intercept protocols will go through you. Your objective is to establish communication, find out what it wants. As the meeting adjourned, the pilots filed out, their expressions, a mixture of confusion, resentment, and a new, grudging respect. Viper lingered at the door, watching as Glyph quietly congratulated Vance. He walked over, stopping in front of her. The bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, uneasy curiosity. Stardust, he said, the name sounding different on his lips. Not a mockery, but a question. How did you know it wouldn't shoot? Vance met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw the immense depth and stillness in her eyes. Because that's not how you study things, she said simply. You don't destroy the thing you're trying to understand. She then walked past him, leaving him alone with the uncomfortable realization that while he had been looking for a fight, she had been seeing the universe. The dynamic in the 33rd Squadron shifted overnight. Vance was no longer the quiet outsider. She was the squadron's designated Spectre Whisperer. A section of the briefing room was cordoned off, becoming her dedicated research cell. It was quickly filled with whiteboards covered in complex equations, star charts, and printouts of the alien data stream. Glyph was her constant shadow, the two of them working with a seamless synergy, often communicating in clipped, technical shorthand that left the other pilots bewildered. The mockery of her call sign had evaporated completely. In its place was a kind of mythologizing awe. The story of her silent standoff with Spectre had already become legend, embellished with each telling. They still didn't understand her, but they were beginning to fear the quiet intellect she represented. Viper watched the transformation from a distance. His confidence was shaken to its core. He was a man who solved problems with speed and violence, but the Spectre problem seemed immune to both. He saw the intricate diagrams on Vance's whiteboards and felt like a relic. A knight in armor staring at the blueprint for a rifle. He was obsolete. Driven by a need to understand, he started spending his off hours in the base library, pulling up files on Vance's service record. He read about her years on the rivet joint, the long, grueling missions spent mapping enemy communication networks, predicting troop movements from faint electronic whispers. He read commendations for missions he'd never even heard of, silent high-stakes intelligence battles fought in the ether. He discovered she held a postgraduate degree in astrophysics. The pieces began to click into place. She wasn't just a pilot, she was a scholar, a codebreaker who just happened to fly. One evening he found her alone in the research cell, staring intently at a projection of the alien star chart. The room was quiet except for the hum of the computers. They're not from where the chart indicates, she said, without turning around. She had known he was there. What do you mean? Viper asked, stepping closer. This chart, she pointed to the complex celestial map. It's a fake, it's mathematically perfect, but it points to a dead system, a star that went nova 2 million years ago. It's a test. A test of what? Of our intelligence, she replied, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were tired but bright with a fierce, burning intensity. It's sending us puzzles. It wants to know if we're smart enough to solve them. It's grading us. Viper looked at the complex data, at the woman who saw a test where everyone else saw a threat. He finally understood. They had been preparing for a war, while Vance had been preparing for an exam. Your call sign, he said, the question surfacing at last. Stardust. Where did it come from? Vance's intense expression softened for the first time. A flicker of deep, distant memory crossed her face. My father, she said, her voice quiet. He was an astronomer. He taught me how to navigate by the stars. He had a small observatory in our backyard, Vance continued, her gaze drifting past Viper to a place far beyond the walls of the research cell, a little dome with a beat-up telescope. Some of my earliest memories are of him lifting me up to the eyepiece, this whole other universe swimming into view. She allowed herself a small, sad smile. He had this way of explaining things, not just the science, but the poetry of it. He'd say that everything, you, me, the earth, the stars, we were all just stardust. Leftovers from ancient cosmic explosions, reassembled into something new, he said. It meant we were all connected, all part of the same story. Viper listened, silent and rapt. He was seeing a side of her he never could have imagined. The cold, analytical pilot was gone, replaced by someone with a deep, resonant history. He wanted to be an astronaut, she said, but he had a minor heart condition that disqualified him, so he spent his life looking up, teaching others to do the same. When I joined the Air Force, he was so proud. He told me, "You'll be closer to them than I ever got." She paused, the memory settling around her. He passed away from a heart attack during my first year at the academy. The night before he died, we were on the phone and he was helping me with a celestial navigation problem. The last thing he ever said to me was, "Just remember, Alara, if you ever get lost, look up, you're made of stardust. You'll always know the way home." The silence in the room was profound. Viper finally understood the name. It wasn't whimsical or soft, it was a memorial. It was a mission statement. It was the heaviest, most meaningful call sign in the entire United States Air Force. When it came time to choose a call sign, she said, her voice regaining its professional tone, it was the only one that made sense. She turned back to the star chart. Spectre is doing the same thing he did. It's giving us a map, a puzzle. It's not testing our weapons, it's testing our minds. At that moment, an alarm blared through the base, a shrill, insistent cry. Glyph burst into the room, his face pale. "Captain, we have a new contact." Multiple contacts. They just appeared. Low orbit, directly above the base. Vance and Viper ran out of the room, heading for the CIC. On the main screen, the situation was terrifying. A dozen red icons had materialized in a perfect ring high above Echelon Air Base. They weren't probing the edges anymore. They had jumped directly on top of them. Then, a new icon appeared in the center of the ring. It was larger, and the system designated it Spectre Prime. A message appeared on every screen in the room, not in code, but in perfect, unadorned English. "We have completed our assessment. Your response was adequate. Prepare to be assimilated. Resistance is suboptimal." The invitation was over. The final exam was about to begin. The message sent a wave of cold dread through the CIC. Assimilated. The word was clinical, devoid of emotion, and more terrifying than any declaration of war. It wasn't a threat of destruction. It was a threat of consumption. Commander Thorne's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Get me a direct line to NORAD. Scramble all available fighters. This is not a drill." The base exploded into a controlled frenzy. Pilots sprinted to their jets, the roar of engines starting to split the Arctic air. On the tactical display, the ring of Spectre craft began to descend, slowly, deliberately, like a crown of thorns being lowered onto their heads. In the center, Spectre Prime remained motionless, an orbital king watching its pawns advance. "They're not drones," Vance said, her eyes locked on the screen, her mind processing the new data at incredible speed. "The smaller craft are moving in perfect formation, but their energy signatures are fluctuating independently. They're individual ships, a fleet that just declared war," Viper countered, his own combat instincts taking over. "We need to hit them hard, hit them fast. Go for the big one in the middle." "No," Vance said, shaking her head. "That's what they expect. It's another test. Look at their formation. It's a classic defensive posture, designed to protect the central command ship. They're inviting a decapitation strike, so we give it to them. And we'd fail." She shot back, her voice sharp. "They showed us they can read our technology. They know exactly how our missiles track, how our radar works. A direct assault would be suicide. They'd swat us out of the sky before we got within 50 miles. The first wave of Raptors, led by Reaper and Blitz, was already climbing, their icons, racing toward the descending ring of hostile craft. Thorne looked at Vance. "What's your call, Captain?" All eyes in the room turned to her. The generals from NORAD were silent on the screen, waiting. The fate of the base, and perhaps much more, rested on her next words. She took a deep breath, her mind sifting through everything she knew, the fake star chart, the energy absorption, the scan, the puzzles. It was all part of a pattern. They weren't just warriors, they were thinkers. "We don't attack the fleet," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "We attack their power source." "Glyph, the ambient radiation readings. Are they still drawing power from the environment?" "Yes, Captain," he confirmed, his fingers a blur on his keyboard. "Their energy levels are rising as they descend into the denser atmosphere." "That's their weakness," Vance declared. "They're drinkers. We need to poison the well." She turned to Thorne. "Sir, I need two planes, myself and Viper, and I need the base's entire supply of chaff and flares. We're not going up there to shoot, we're going up there to make it snow. It was a plan so counterintuitive, so utterly bizarre, that for a moment, no one spoke. Then Viper, without a hint of his old arrogance, just nodded. I've heard worse ideas. Let's go make a blizzard. The mission was unprecedented. Two of the world's most advanced air superiority fighters were being launched not with missiles, but with their countermeasures pods filled to capacity. Chaff, tiny strips of aluminum designed to confuse radar, and flares, magnesium charges too, decoy heat-seeking missiles, were weapons of defense, not offense. As Vance and Viper taxied to the runway, the first engagement was already underway. The radio was a chaotic cacophony of panicked shouts and missile alerts. Reaper 1, brake right, he's on your 6. Fox 2, splash, negative. He dodged it. How did he dodge it? On the tactical display, it was a slaughter. The Spectre fighters, now designated Phantoms, moved with the same impossible agility as the first contact. They didn't just evade missiles, they seemed to anticipate them, sidestepping the attacks with contemptuous ease. They fired back with bolts of focused energy that disabled the Raptor systems one by one, turning them into helpless, gliding bricks. 2F-22S were already down, their pilots having ejected over the frozen tundra. Eagle-7 and Viper 1 are wheels up, Vance reported, her voice a sliver of calm in the storm of panic. They rocketed into the sky, not toward the dogfight, but climbing at a steep, almost vertical angle, pushing their engines to the limit. Their goal was not the ring of phantoms, but the empty space high above them, near the stationary Spectre Prime. Stardust, what's the plan? Viper asked over their private channel, his breathing steady as he matched her climb. They feed on the electromagnetic spectrum, she explained, her eyes flicking between her instruments and the unfolding battle below. We're going to give them indigestion. We're going to create a blanket of electromagnetic noise, so thick they can't see, can't communicate, and can't power up. They reached 60,000 feet, far above the main battle. Below them, the dogfight was a terrifying light show of explosions and energy bolts. On my mark, Viper, Vance commanded. We'll make a single pass, deploying everything we have. Create a dense, overlapping cloud between Spectre Prime and its fighters. Ready? Mark. In perfect sync, they rolled their Raptors, inverted and dove, hitting the deployment buttons. Their jets began to spew a massive, glittering cloud of chaff. Tens of thousands of tiny aluminum strips filled the stratosphere, catching the light of the Arctic sun that was just beginning to crest the horizon. It looked like a sudden, metallic snowstorm, a river of silver being poured across the sky. They followed the chaff release with a volley of flares, hundreds of brilliant magnesium sparks that burned with blinding intensity. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Phantoms, which had been moving with fluid precision, suddenly faltered. Their movements became jerky, erratic. The coordinated attack dissolved into chaos as their connection to the command ship was severed by the wall of electronic noise. On the ground, the CIC screens filled with static. I've lost telemetry on the Phantoms, a controller yelled. Their energy signatures are dropping. Down below, the surviving Raptors saw their chance. All vultures. This is Reaper. Blind. Engage at will. The tide of the battle had turned, but Vance knew it was only temporary. As they pulled out of their dive, her proximity alert screamed. Spectre Prime, the king on the chessboard, had started to move, and it was coming directly for them. Spectre Prime was different. It descended not with the silent grace of its smaller brethren, but with a palpable sense of menace. It was 10 times the size of a phantom, a massive, obsidian arrowhead that seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of the sky. As it moved, the cloud of chaff and flares began to part around it, pushed aside by an invisible bow wave of energy. It was unaffected by their electronic blizzard. Viper, Stardust, evasive maneuvers. It's targeting us, Vance ordered, her voice tight with G-force as she threw Eagle-7 into a spiraling dive. Viper was right there with her, his Raptor a mirror image of her own. It's ignoring the others, he grunted, the strain audible in his voice. It knows who's in charge. On the screen in the CIC, the tactical situation had become terrifyingly clear. The remaining Phantoms, though disorganized, were still lethal. But the true threat was the massive icon of Spectre Prime, which was now locked in a deadly pursuit of Vance and Viper's jets, ignoring the rest of the battle completely. It's adapting, Glyph said from his console, his voice grim. It's rerouting its power, creating a localized shield against the interference. It's learning. Spectre Prime didn't fire energy bolts. It used a far more insidious weapon, a beam. of focused gravity emanated from its nose, reaching out for Viper's F-22. It wasn't a destructive beam, it was a tractor beam. "I'm losing control," Viper yelled. "My flight surfaces are unresponsive. It's pulling me in." His raptor began to shudder violently, its nose being inexorably drawn toward the massive alien ship. He was fighting his own controls, the stick shaking in his hands, but the pull was too strong. Vance saw it happening. In a split second, she made a decision that defied every rule in the book. "Viper, cut your engines now. Are you insane?" he yelled back. "It'll pull me in faster. Just do it," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. Trusting her, Viper chopped the throttles. The roar of his engines died, and his plane, now a 30-ton glider, began to fall. The gravitational pull, which had been locked onto the immense energy output of his engines, suddenly lost its primary target. The beam wavered for a second, and Viper's jet, no longer fighting the pull with its own thrust, slipped free. He fell for a terrifying 10,000 feet before he could restart his engines, the turbines screaming back to life just above the Arctic peaks. He was safe, but the move had cost them precious seconds. Spectre Prime, having lost its prey, now turned its full attention to the one who had engineered the escape. A red lock-on warning blared through Vance's cockpit. The gravity beam had found her. There was no escape. She was too close, and her engines were burning at full military power. "Stardust, get out of there," Viper screamed, pulling his jet around to help, but he was too far away. "Negative," Viper Vance's voice came back, strained but resolute. "I see the pattern now." She didn't try to dive or turn. Instead, she did the opposite. She hit the afterburners, rocketing her Raptor directly toward the massive alien ship. "Stardust, what are you doing?" Thorne's voice boomed over the comms. "It's a collector," she explained, her words clipped by the crushing G-force. "It doesn't just absorb ambient energy, it absorbs kinetic energy, too. The harder you fight, the stronger it gets. It's been feeding on our own aggression." She was flying into the beast's mouth, a final, desperate gambit based on a flash of cosmic intuition. The distance between Eagle-7 and Spectre Prime closed in a heartbeat. On the screens in the CIC, it looked like a suicide run. The small green icon of Vance's Raptor was about to be swallowed by the massive red triangle of the alien command ship. Her own cockpit was a screaming chaos of alarms and warning lights. The gravitational pull was immense, warping the very air around her canopy, making the stars themselves seem to bend and twist. "It's not just pulling the plane, it's pulling me," she grunted into her mic, the force making it feel like her bones were being drawn from her body. But she held her course, her eyes fixed on the center of the obsidian arrowhead. She remembered her father's lessons, not about stars, but about black holes. He had told her that they weren't just cosmic vacuum cleaners, they were points of infinite density where the normal rules of physics broke down. You couldn't fight a black hole, you had to use its own gravity against it. Spectre Prime was a miniature black hole, feeding on energy, and she was about to give it the biggest meal it had ever had. With her plane now just a few hundred yards from the alien craft, she made her final move. She cut the afterburners and, at the same time, fired her main cannon, not at the ship, but at a point just to the side of it. The stream of 20mm cannon shells, fired at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, was a physical object, a spear of kinetic energy. As she had predicted, Spectre Prime's energy field instinctively moved to absorb the attack. The gravity beam, which had been locked onto her, shifted for a microsecond to intercept the stream of bullets. That microsecond was all she needed. Freed from the beam's direct pull, she deployed her air brake and slammed the control stick hard to the side. The F-22, an aircraft not designed for such abuse at supersonic speeds, groaned in protest, the frame shuddering on the verge of disintegration. It performed an almost flat spin, a wrenching, violent maneuver that bled off its forward momentum in a catastrophic rush. She was no longer a projectile flying at the ship. She was a nearly stationary object, falling past it. Spectre Prime's systems, designed to track and absorb high-energy threats, couldn't cope. It was like a predator lunging for